Project Fenix. Chapter 1. The Light at Jupiter. The alert came through at 03:47 station time, and Admiral Alina Kovac was awake for it, because she hadn't slept properly in 11 years and wasn't going to start now. She was in the flag cabin of the TDF Purin, drinking tea that had gone cold an hour ago, reading maintenance reports from a fleet that was held together with weld seams and prayer. The comm panel chimed twice, priority traffic, and then a third time, which meant someone was scared. She keyed it before the fourth. Kovac. Ma'am. Lieutenant O say, sensor watch. His voice had a flatness to it that she'd heard exactly twice before in her career. Once at Luna, during the reactor breach on the Hyperion. Once at her husband's funeral, from her own mouth. The Jupiter object is decelerating. She set the tea down. The cup clicked against the magnetic pad, louder than it should have been in the small cabin. Say again. The object. It's breaking. Hard. Sustained 30 gravities. No reaction plume we can resolve. Astrodynamics says it'll be stationary relative to Callisto in 19 hours. 30 gravities. No plume. She turned the numbers over the way you'd turn over a stone with something living underneath it. Humanity's best drive. The fusion torches on the Purin herself, the pride of 40 years of engineering, could pull 5 gravities for 6 minutes before the shock frames started singing and the medics started earning their pay. 30. Sustained. No plume. Wake the ops staff, she said, quietly. For 8 months the thing had been a light. That was all. A point source that had appeared beyond the heliopause moving at a quarter of the speed of light. And every observatory on Earth and off it had watched it come, and the news feeds had cycled through wonder and terror and boredom, in that order, because 8 months is a long time and people can get used to anything, even a light in the sky that shouldn't exist. The governments had sent signals. Mathematics. Primes, then hydrogen line multiples, then music, then, toward the end, when the silence had started to feel less like distance and more like a decision, plain language broadcasts in 40 languages. We are here. We see you. Talk to us. The light hadn't answered. It had braked at Jupiter, and it had gone to Callisto, and then the telescopes had shown them what it was doing there, and after that nobody talked about wonder anymore. Kovac stood in the flag briefing room 14 hours later with the senior staff of Combined Fleet arranged around the holotank, watching the imagery come in from the survey drones at Jupiter. The drones were dying at a rate of 1 every 90 minutes. Something out there didn't like being looked at, but the ones that lived long enough sent pictures, and the pictures were enough. The object was not one ship. It was hundreds. The main body was a cylinder 11 kilometers long, and around it moved a shoal of smaller vessels, smaller meaning the size of the Purin, some of them, and others the size of cities, and the whole formation had settled over Callisto like flies on meat. Ribbons of material rose from the moon's surface. Ice, silicates, metal. The imagery showed the ground itself coming apart in ordered strips, kilometers wide, lifting into orbit along lines of some force nobody could name, feeding into the open mouths of the harvester ships. They were eating the moon. 11 days at current rate to strip the accessible crust volatiles, said Commander Reyes, her intelligence chief. He was a careful man who chose words the way a sapper chose footing. Then, we assess, they move inward. Ganymede or Europa. Then the belt. Then, he didn't finish it. He didn't need to. Everyone in the room had run the same arithmetic, and the arithmetic ended in the same place. A blue-white planet, third from the sun, with 9 billion people on it, and more accessible water and metal and organics than everything they'd eaten so far combined. Response to our transmissions, Kovac said. It wasn't a question. She asked anyway, every briefing, the way you check a dead man's pulse twice. None, ma'am. We've tried everything short of skywriting. They receive. We can see their antennas track our transmitters. They don't answer. They receive, and they don't answer. That was the part that kept her up, more than the stripped moon, more than the 30 gravity drives. You didn't answer a thing you were negotiating with. You didn't answer furniture. You didn't answer the cattle in the chute. Fleet status, she said. Captain Duval, her chief of staff, pulled the numbers up, though everyone knew them by heart. Combined fleet, the whole of it, everything 4 squabbling power blocks had managed to bolt together in the 8 months since the light appeared. 63 warships, 14 heavy cruisers built around spinal railguns, mass drivers that could put a 50-kilogram tungsten slug down range at 12 kilometers a second, 22 destroyers with lighter rails and torpedo racks. The rest escorts, tenders, converted haulers with missile pods welded where the cargo cradles used to be. No energy weapons. The laser programs had never gotten past point defense wattage. No shields, because shields were a thing from entertainment feeds, not physics anyone owned. Armor, rails, torpedoes, and crews who had trained for a war against each other that had never come, now pointed at something none of them had trained for at all. There's a question the council keeps asking, Duval said quietly, when the briefing broke up and the others had filed out. He was the only one on the staff old enough to say things to her plainly. Whether we fight at all, whether 63 hulls against that does anything but make orphans. Kovac looked at the holotank. The frozen image of Callisto hung there, coming apart in ribbons. They've been asked to talk 4,000 times, she said. They eat moons, and they don't answer. Tell me what happens if we don't fight, Michel. Tell me they take Jupiter and leave. No, ma'am. No. She shut the tank down. The room went dim. We fight because the alternative is standing in the chute. And because. She stopped. There was an order sitting in her private queue, sealed under council authority, that she had read 4 times and understood once. She didn't mention it. And because Earth needs time. Every hour that fleet spends killing us at Mars is an hour it isn't spending at Earth. That's the mission, whatever the news feeds call it. We are 63 hulls of purchase time. Duval was silent for a moment. Then he spoke. The crews shouldn't hear it put that way. The crews already know. They're not stupid. They've seen the same pictures. She picked up her cold tea, looked at it, put it back down. Set the fleet for Mars orbit. High guard over the yards. If they come inward, they come through us. They came inward on the 9th day. Not 11. 9. The first lesson of the war, delivered before a shot was fired. Every estimate would be wrong, and wrong in the direction that killed you. The alien fleet left Callisto a cracked and steaming ruin and burned for the inner system at a steady 8 gravities, cruising speed, apparently, a gentle stroll, and the plot in the Purin's Combat Information Center showed the intercept geometry resolving with the indifferent precision of orbital mechanics. They were not maneuvering to avoid the human fleet. They were not maneuvering at all. Their course ran through Mars' orbit like a blade through a hanging sheet, and combined fleet happened to be part of the sheet. Kovacs stood her watches, ate her rations, recorded a message for her daughter that she deleted twice and finally sent on the 3rd try, for minutes of a mother's voice saying very little, because everything true was either classified or unbearable. Vera was 26, a geneticist at the Nairobi Crucible Labs, brilliant in the way that had skipped Kovac's generation entirely. The message said, I love you. Do your work. Whatever you hear about what happens out here, remember that we chose it. She didn't know, when she sent it, how completely her daughter would come to understand. 61 hours before intercept, she addressed the fleet. She had written a speech and thrown it away. What she said instead, to 63 ships and 19,000 crew, took under a minute. This is Kovac. You've all seen Callisto. You all know what's coming and what we have. I won't lie to you about the odds, because you'd know I was lying, and I need you to believe me later when it matters. Here's what's true. Behind us there are 9 billion people who cannot run, and cannot hide, and cannot fight. We can fight. That's the whole of it. That's the privilege we have that they don't. Stand your stations. Make every slug count. Purn out. Afterward, In the quiet of the flag bridge, Duval said, "Believe you later when it matters. I want to know what they are going to have to believe, ma'am." Kovac watched the red arc of the enemy course crawl across the plot. "I'll know it when I see it," she said. Chapter 2. Tungsten. The Battle of Mars orbit began at 11:09 Zulu on the 4th of March, 2056, when the Purin's spinal rail spoke for the first time in anger, and for 11 minutes, 11 entire, impossible minutes, humanity thought it might win. The firing solution had taken 3 days to build. The enemy didn't jink, didn't jam, didn't do anything a human fleet would do, and that arrogance was the only gift they gave. So Kovac's gunnery officers had wrapped their whole plan around it. 63 ships, spread across 40,000 kilometers in a shallow bowl, with its open face toward the oncoming fleet, every railgun in the formation slaved to a single fire control mesh. The enemy would cross the engagement envelope at a combined closing velocity of 200 kilometers per second. At that speed, a 50-kilogram tungsten slug didn't need explosives. It didn't need anything except to be in the right place. "Firing sequence Alpha," said the Purin's gunnery chief, a Brazilian master warrant named Cardoso with 22 years on rails. "Rounds free in 10. Kovac stood at the flag station, boots locked to the deck, skin suit sealed to the neck, helmet racked at her hip. Around her the CIC ran with a low murmur of voices, the click of harness buckles, the smell of scorched dust that the recyclers never quite got out of a warship's air. Somewhere below her feet, capacitor banks the size of trucks wind up to charge. The deck lights dimmed as they drank. "Rounds free." The Purin shuddered, a long triple concussion, felt through the deck plating and the soles of her boots and the roots of her teeth, and threw 3 slugs into the dark. Across the bowl of the formation, 62 other ships did the same, and the plot filled with a lacework of thin gold lines, hundreds of them, reaching out toward the red wall of the enemy advance. Time of flight, for minutes and change. For minutes is long enough to become an atheist and revert twice. Kovac watched the plot and breathed and did not pray, exactly, but held her mind very still, the way her grandmother had taught her to do in the shelters in Kharkiv when she was 6 years old and the world was ending for the first time. The gold lines touched the red wall. The first hit registered as a flicker, one enemy vessel, a mid-sized harvester escort, its icon stuttering from solid to hollow. Then the light from the actual event arrived on the optical feeds, and the CIC went silent, because the escort had come apart. Not damaged. Apart. The slug had met it at 200 kilometers a second and delivered the energy of a small nuclear weapon into a single point of structure, and the alien ship had opened like a seed pod, spilling glittering wreckage and a long spiral of freezing atmosphere across the dark. They don't have shields either, Kovac thought, with a lurch that was almost vertigo. All the drives and the silence and the eaten moon, and when the metal arrives, they break like we do. The second hit came 9 seconds later, then a third and fourth almost together. A harvester the size of a city took a slug amidships and folded around the wound, drive still burning, pushing itself into a slow tumble that shed pieces the size of destroyers. The CIC's silence broke, not cheering, nothing so clean, but a low animal sound from 30 throats at once, half snarl and half sob. The sound of people who had spent 8 months certain they were already dead being handed one thin reason to doubt it. 11 kills, Reyes read off, voice cracking on the second word. 12. Ma'am, 12 confirmed, 2 more streaming debris. Sequence Bravo, Kovac said. Keep firing. Pour it on. The capacitors screamed. The deck shook. 63 ships threw tungsten as fast as the rails would cycle, and for 11 minutes the mathematics of the war ran in humanity's favor, and Kovac let herself, for perhaps 90 seconds of those 11 minutes, imagine a version of history where this worked. Then the enemy adapted, and the lesson began. It started as a sensor ghost, a haze on the forward feeds, as if the space between the fleets had grown a skin of static. Cardoso saw it first and didn't like it, and Kovac had learned across 30 years to attend to what her master warrants didn't like. "Rounds are dropping off the plot," he said. "Sequence Charlie, birds 7 through 30. I'm losing them mid-flight. No impacts. They're just—" His hands moved over the console, calling up the tracking data, running it back. "Gone." The optical feeds told it. The enemy fleet had exhaled. There was no better word for it. From vents along every hull, the alien ships had released clouds of something, particulate, self-moving, dense, and the clouds had flowed out ahead of the formation and knitted themselves into a screen 1,000 kilometers deep. The next salvo of slugs went into it, and the feeds caught what happened. Each round met not armor, but a swarm. Thousands of fist-sized bodies that tracked the incoming slug and threw themselves into its path, one after another, each impact shaving velocity and slapping the round off its line, until 50 kilograms of tungsten that had left the rail as a weapon drifted out the far side of the cloud as scrap, tumbling, slow, harmless. 11 minutes. They had watched humanity's only weapon work for 11 minutes, understood it completely, and grown an answer. "All rounds, sequence Delta, no effect," Cardoso said. His voice had gone flat and careful. "Fleet-wide, ma'am. Nothing's getting through." "Torpedoes," Duval said. "Saturation." Belay that. Kovac was watching the plot, and the plot was changing. The red wall was not a wall anymore. It was unfolding, the enemy formation opening along its length like a hand spreading its fingers, elements peeling off high and low. A flanking geometry so basic that any first-year cadet would recognize it. Executed at accelerations no human ship could answer. They hadn't maneuvered before because they hadn't needed to. Now they decided the 63 hulls in front of them were worth the effort of an actual battle, and the effort was terrifying to watch. "Signal the fleet," she said. "Formation Kestrel. Tighten the bowl. And tell the crews." She paused a half-second. "Tell them to seal helmets." The first energy weapon fired 90 seconds later. It showed on the feeds as a line. That was all. A hair-thin line of violet-white connecting an enemy cruiser to the TDF Shenandoah, existing for a tenth of a second, gone. Where it had touched, the Shenandoah was open to space along her whole port side, armor and frame and hull sliced through as if the ship were fog. She fell out of formation venting fire and bodies, and her icon on the plot went from green to amber to black in under a minute, and 190 crew went with it. "Beam weapon," Reyes said. "Coherent something. The physics people will have a name." Range at time of firing was 9,000 kilometers. He looked up. "Ma'am, our rails max out at effective 4,000 against a maneuvering target. They can kill us from more than twice the distance we can even reach." "And they will," Kovac thought. "One at a time, from beyond our arm's length, like a man pulling the legs off something in a jar." That was exactly what they did. It took 4 hours. The enemy did not rush, because nothing in the sky could make them rush. Their flanking elements stood off at 8,000 kilometers and picked ships out of the human formation with single shots. One line of violet light. One ship open to vacuum. A pause of a minute or 3 minutes or 10 while they did whatever they did between kills. Recharged. Considered. Kovac's captains tried everything the profession knew. Evasive helixes. The beams led them perfectly after the third attempt. Debris screens, torpedo swarms, coordinated rushes to close the range. The swarm clouds ate the torpedoes, and the ships that rushed died first. Always, the enemy killing the brave with a precision that felt like pedagogy. This is what boldness buys you. Watch. The Agincourt died at 1420. The Kirishima at 1431, with Rear Admiral Sato aboard. The Trafalgar, the Marathon, the Xuanwu, The converted hauler Beatriz de Silva, whose captain had been a fishing fleet manager 14 months ago. Black icon after black icon. And the voice traffic on the fleet net thinning out. Fewer stations reporting. The reports themselves going strange and quiet the way voices did when the people behind them had stopped expecting rescue and started narrating for the record. At 15:02, the Perrin herself took a grazing hit that boiled away 100 meters of dorsal armor and killed 19 crew in the forward rail room. And the ship screamed for a while, structure ringing, atmosphere howling out through the wound until the bulkhead sealed. Kovac hung in her harness through the shaking and looked at the plot, at the 31 green icons left of 63, and performed the calculation she had been refusing to perform since the swarm screen first blossomed. They could not win. They could not retreat. The enemy was faster. A retreat was just a slower way to die, with the shots arriving from behind. They could not even trade, hull for hull, because nothing they threw was landing. 63 hulls of purchase time, she'd told Duval. The only question left was the exchange rate. Michel, she said quietly, tell me how long until the enemy's current geometry closes to under 1,000 kilometers of our formation center. Duval looked at her. He'd been at her side for 9 years, and he heard everything underneath the question. The flanking elements are already inside 2,000 and closing lazily. They're coming in to finish at short range. Maybe 40 minutes. A pause. I don't understand why they close at all, ma'am. They could kill us all from where they stand. Because they've stopped being careful, Kovacs said. We hit them for 11 minutes and then never touched them again. They've concluded we're finished. She unlocked her boots from the deck. Get me Cardoso and the chief engineer. And open a captain's channel. Every ship still answering. Ma'am. She was already moving, and the thing she had been refusing to look at for 4 hours was fully in front of her now. And it was monstrous, and it was the only shape left in the room. They're wrong about us being finished, she said. We have 31 weapons left. We're standing on them. Chapter 3. Epsilon. The chief engineer of the Perrin was a heavy-set Ghanaian woman named Commander Abina Owusu, and when Kovac told her what she wanted, Owusu did not flinch and did not argue. She stood in the shuddering CIC with coolant burns on her sleeves from the forward rail room, and she thought about it for the length of 4 breaths, and then she said, Yes, it can be done. Talk me through it. The torch is a magnetically confined fusion drive. The confinement is the whole art. We spend 90% of the engineering keeping the reaction from being a bomb. If I collapse the mag bottle asymmetrically at full burn, with the fuel injectors slammed wide open past every safety stop, the drive doesn't just explode. It detonates directionally, along the thrust axis. A shaped fusion charge with a starship wrapped around it. Her voice stayed level, a professional describing a procedure. Only her hands, gripping the console rail, had gone pale at the knuckles. Yield depends on remaining fuel mass. For the Perrin, fully fueled, high hundreds of megatons. And that is before you count the ship herself arriving at whatever velocity we've built. Detonation inside 500 kilometers of a target on an intercept vector. She stopped. Nothing survives that. Nothing we've seen today survives that. Time to rig it. The overrides are hardwired against exactly this. I need to physically cut interlocks in the reactor spaces. 40 minutes with my best people. Other ships' engineers can follow a checklist if I write one, if their chiefs are still alive. Write it, Kovacs said. You have 30. Owusu pushed off toward the aft hatch, caught herself on the frame, and looked back. Admiral. The cruise. There's no version of this with lifeboats. The timing needs hands on stations to the last second. The enemy will burn down anything that maneuvers oddly, so the rigging has to hide inside normal drive behavior until the final seconds. Whoever flies these ships flies them all the way in. I know, Kovacs said. I'm telling you so that you know I know, Owusu said, and went. The captain's channel carried 31 faces, some steady, some bloodied, some lit by emergency red because their bridges were dead, and they were commanding from auxiliary compartments the size of closets. Kovac looked at the mosaic of them for a moment before she spoke. She had promoted 11 of these people. She had attended the weddings of 3, the court-martial of 1, the funerals of too many of their predecessors in the last 5 hours. "You've all seen the plot," she said. "I won't decorate it. We cannot hurt them at range. In 40 minutes they close to short range to finish us, because they believe we're beaten. That belief is the last asset this fleet possesses, and I intend to spend it." She laid it out in flat declarative sentences. The collapsed bottles, the shaped detonations, the fleet holding its dying animal drift until the enemy came inside 500 kilometers, and then 31 ships lighting their torches in the same second, not to escape, but to arrive. Every surviving hull assigned a target. The heavy cruisers onto the harvester capitals, the destroyers onto the beam cruisers, the tenders and the converted haulers onto whatever their fuel mass could kill. "This is not an order I can give," she said. "Regulations don't have a page for it, and I wouldn't use the page if they did. Every ship that stays, stays because her captain chose and her crew chose. Any ship that wants to run instead, run now. Burn hard for Mars, and no one on this channel will speak one word against you, in this life or in the histories. You bought Earth 6 hours today. That debt is paid in full. What comes next is a different currency." She paused. 31 faces watched her. "The Perrin stays. I stay with her. That's all. Captains, pull your crews. You have 10 minutes. She closed the channel and found her hands were steady, which surprised her distantly, like noticing the weather. Duval was looking at her. "You could command from a lifeboat relay," he said. "Someone should survive to report how this was done. That's not vanity, that's doctrine. The timing mesh needs the flag fire control system, and the flag fire control system is welded into this hull. You know that." She checked the plot. The enemy flankers drifted closer, unhurried, certain, and they'll be watching the flagship hardest of all, Michelle. If the Perrin runs, they wonder why. If the Perrin sits here bleeding, they come in close to take the trophy. I'm not the bait because I'm brave. I'm the bait because I'm the biggest fish." Duval said nothing for a moment. Then he unclipped his lifeboat access chit, the little brass-colored tag every officer carried, and set it on the console between them, and went back to his station. The polls came back in 9 minutes. 31 of 31. She had thought, hoped, in some small human corner of herself, that 2 or 3 would go, would carry the story home in person. Not one. Afterward there was no way to ask why, but she thought she understood it anyway. Everyone aboard those ships had seen Callisto come apart in ribbons. Everyone had family in the chute. Arithmetic, again. The same arithmetic, run 19,000 times in 19,000 skulls, arriving at the same answer. She recorded a final transmission for Mars Relay and Earth. The tactical data, the full sensor takes of the swarm screens, and the beam weapons, Owusu's checklist, everything the next fight would need. At the end of it, off the official record but on the channel, she said, "To whoever commands next. They adapt inside of minutes, so never show them a weapon twice. They grow cautious only after they bleed. Make them bleed early." And then, because her daughter would hear this eventually, because everything got heard eventually. "Vera, we chose it. Remember. Transmission away. Light lag to Earth, 11 minutes. Her words would still be traveling when it started. The enemy crossed 1,000 kilometers at 1651, spread in a gorgeous open lattice, 140 ships, kill sure, close enough now that the optical feeds showed hull texture. Plated, segmented, oddly organic, like the carapaces of things that had grown rather than been built. They swept the drifting human wrecks with targeting emissions and found only cooling metal and leaking air and 31 hulls tumbling with drives cold, and whatever process served them for satisfaction. Kovac hoped it was running hot. At 600 kilometers, a beam ship took its time dissecting the corpse of the Marathon, peeling the dead cruiser open along its frames with short surgical pulses. Curious now, studying the kill. At 540 kilometers, Cardoso's fire control mesh, running passive, silent, patient, painted the last of the 31 assignments and showed her the board. Every green icon locked to a red one. Intercept solution cycling. Drives held at cold idle, one command away from murder. Kovac took the fleet-wide channel. There was one thing left to say, and she kept it to 4 words. The words already loaded. Agreed. Waiting. At 480 kilometers, she said them. All ships. Light them. 31 fusion torches ignited in the same quarter-second, and the dying fleet came alive and leapt. The enemy was fast. That was the terrible beauty of it. Even ambushed, even at 400 kilometers with human ships accelerating at emergency, plus overrides straight down their throats, they very nearly answered in time. Beams snapped out and the Vindicator died short of her target, and the Copenhagen, and the tender Almaty, but a ship rigged to detonate does not have to arrive intact. Only near, and Owusu's deadman triggers fired on proximity, and even the failures were bombs. The Purin crossed her 400 kilometers in a time Kovac did not consciously experience. She had eyes on the forward feed, the enemy capital swelling from a point to a shape to a world of segmented plate, and around it on the plot the first detonations were blooming, white spheres swallowing red icons 2 and 3 at a time. She felt the deck through her boots, the drive at full song for the first and last time, a note below hearing that lived in the sternum. Someone in the CIC was reciting something, low, rhythmic, a prayer or a poem or a name, over and over. Cardoso called ranges like a man calling a race, steady, almost gentle. 300, 200, 1. She thought, it's bright. And it was. The whole feed, the whole sky, all of it, bright. The observatories on Mars recorded the battle's end as a string of 31 flashes over 4 seconds, several of them briefly outshining the sun in the Martian sky, and then a long, strange aurora as the expanding shells of plasma swept through the wreckage field and lit it like dust in a shaft of light. The count took 2 days to confirm, because there was so little left to count and nothing left alive on the human side to report. Of the enemy fleet, 140 ships engaged. Out of the roughly 260 that had entered the system, 71 were destroyed outright, and 11 more were drifting derelict, cored by blast fronts, tumbling, and dark. Half the fleet that had eaten Callisto had been spent killing 63 ships that hadn't been able to touch it at arm's length. The enemy stopped. For 18 days, the survivors of the alien armada hung motionless beyond Mars' orbit, doing whatever things without voices do in the aftermath of a lesson. Repairing, recalculating, learning caution, exactly the way Alina Kovac had told her successors they learned it. 18 days. On Earth, in certain deep and hidden places, people who could not explain to the morning world why the fleet had been spent like that, or what its purchased hours were for, worked around the clock and blessed her name. Then the enemy came in, careful now, toward the blue planet third from the sun, and the war became a thing of mud and blood again, the way wars on Earth had always been. Chapter 4. The Sala. Staff Sergeant Inés Carrasco had been born 40 kilometers from the Sala de Atacama, and she had spent her whole childhood trying to leave it, and now she was going to die defending it, which was the kind of joke God told when he was drinking. The landings had come on the 29th of March. Not an invasion the way the old films had imagined it. No cities burning first, no monuments melted for terror's sake. The enemy dropped where the resources were, with the same blunt appetite they'd shown at Callisto. The lithium flats of Chile and Bolivia, the copper belt of Katanga, the Pilbara iron country, the Siberian nickel cities, 9 landing zones, all of them mines or fields or basins, and the pattern told you everything about what Earth was to them. Not an enemy homeland. A deposit. The thing that came down on the Sala was the size of a small mountain range, a segmented lander 11 kilometers long. They later learned it was one of the harvester capitals, one of the survivors of Mars, and it settled onto the salt flat with a slowness that was worse than speed, dust, and vaporized brine rising around it in a wall that turned the sunset brown for 300 kilometers. Within 6 hours, the ground around it was moving the way Callisto's ground had moved. Ribbons of earth, rising. Within 12 hours, the first soldiers of the enemy came out to meet the humans who had come to stop it, and humanity got its first look at what had been flying those ships. Roaches was what everyone called them by the second day, though they were nothing like roaches. The word was armor for the mind. That was all. You could shoot a roach. The truth stood 2.5 meters at the shoulder mid-stride and moved on 4 legs with 2 more limbs carried high and folded, and the folded limbs ended in fused lances of grown crystal that spat coherent energy in 10th-second pulses. The bodies wore no manufactured armor because they didn't need any. The carapace was armor, layered chitin over mineral weave, grown in ridged plates that shed rifle fire the way a helmet sheds hail. 50 caliber could crack the plate at close range. Sometimes, the creature usually finished what it was doing before it noticed. They did not use cover. They did not retreat. Nobody ever saw one help a wounded one. They came on in staggered ways with a patience that had nothing in it you could hate, which made it worse. And behind them the harvester ate the Sala, kilometer by kilometer, day and night, a sound like the world being unzipped. Against them, at the Sala de Atacama, stood the Southern Cone Command. About 40,000 soldiers of 11 nations, and 1 regiment, hers, of the only weapon system on Earth that gave anyone a fighting chance. The X-07 was 400 kilograms of powered exoskeleton wrapped around one human being. Titanium lattice bones, artificial muscle bundled like cable, a sealed torso shell, and servos that let a soldier sprint at 40 kilometers an hour carrying what a mule couldn't. On the right arm rode the reason the regiment existed, a man-portable railgun, the M91, a 1.5 meters of coilwork that threw a 12-millimeter tungsten dart at 3 kilometers a second. The dart weighed less than a finger. At that speed it went through carapace, plate the way a nail goes through a saint's palm, and out the other side, and through the roach behind. The M91 held 30 darts and drank power like a dying man drinks water. When the capacitors ran dry, and in a real fight they ran dry in minutes, you fell back on the left arm, which carried a 12.7-millimeter machine gun, a weapon from her grandfather's wars, chemical propellant, and brass and brute noise, good for cracking joints and eyes and the soft junctions where limb met thorax, if you were close, if you were lucky, if you had time to aim at a thing that crossed 100 meters in 7 seconds. Carrasco's platoon was 32 suits on the first day of the battle. The battle lasted 7 days. Day 1 was almost good. The regiment met the first big push at the edge of the flats, hauled down among the old evaporation ponds, and the M91s did what nothing at Mars had done twice. They killed and kept killing. The darts were too small and too fast for whatever sense the roaches used to answer threats. The same fatal half-generation of lag the fleet had enjoyed for its 11 minutes, and Carrasco's platoon alone put down over 200 of them in the first 6 hours, the creatures folding mid-stride, punched through, the ones behind walking through the dead without a glance. By nightfall the line had held everywhere, and some fool at headquarters used the word victory on an open channel, and every veteran of the Mars data stream, which was every soldier who had watched the feeds with their stomach in their boots, thought the same thought at the same time. They're going to adapt. Shoot everything you can before they do. Day 2, they adapted. The morning waves came on under screens, living screens, a smaller cast nobody had seen yet, low flat scuttling things with carapaces angled like plows, and the M91 darts that hit those glancing plates keyholed and tumbled, and arrived at the warrior ranks behind as bruises instead of bullets. And the warriors had changed their spacing, opened out, stopped offering the neat enfilade lines of day one. The kill rate fell by half. The regiment's losses tripled. Energy lances took suits through the visor, through the chest shell, through the hip actuator. The pulses didn't wound, mostly. What they touched, they cooked. Corporal Nunez died on Carrasco's left at 0940. A violet flash, and then his suit standing motionless with everything human in it gone to steam and char, servos locked, a 400-kilogram headstone in the shape of a man. Day 3, the regiment learned back. You fired the M91 from ambush and displaced before the return pulse found you. 7 seconds. The interval was 7 seconds. Some gunnery god at battalion had timed it, and you never fired twice from the same hole. You baited the plow screens onto minefields and shot the warriors in the confusion. You learned that the joints stayed soft, always, whatever else changed, and that a 12.7 burst walked up a four-leg junction would drop one at 30 meters, and that 30 meters from a live one was a place where the mind went white, and the training either held you or it didn't. Hers held. She stopped counting kills on day 3, not from horror, but from arithmetic. The Sala held tens of thousands of them, and the harvester was hatching or building or thawing more. The intel people never settled on a verb, faster than the regiment killed. Day 4, the water went bad and the resupply flights stopped coming, because the enemy had finally noticed the airfields. She led what was left of 2nd Squad in a night raid against a forward screen line, and it worked, and it changed nothing, and they came back 7 where 9 had gone out, dragging a dead man's suit because the suits were now worth more than the soldiers and nobody said that aloud. Command shortened the line. The word retreat was not used. The line simply became shorter, the way a candle becomes shorter. Day 5. The enemy stopped coming in waves and came all day, a pressure instead of a rhythm, and Carrasco understood in her body what the intel briefings had circled around. The enemy did not experience this as a battle. There was no plan against them to disrupt, no morale to break, no commander to kill. It was a pumping action. It was the harvester's perimeter, expanding at the speed of digestion, and the human line was a mechanical resistance to be worn away at whatever exchange rate presented itself, and the exchange rate no longer mattered to them, because they had learned at Mars what humans cost at their most dangerous, and had priced it in and come anyway. Day 6, her platoon was 11 suits, and the regiment was a name attached to fragments. They fought that day inside the town of San Pedro de Atacama, or inside what artillery and lances had left of it, close work in broken streets where the M91 was a club with a battery, and the fighting came down to the 12.7 and grenades pushed into joint gaps by hand, by the suit's steel hand, close enough to see that the enemy's eyes were not eyes in any way that let you pretend something looked back. She lost Ruiz there, and Ocampo, and Lieutenant Vidal, which made her the platoon commander of what was no longer a platoon. Toward dusk, a girl of maybe 10 ran out of a cellar across the plaza. There were not supposed to be civilians left. There were always civilians left, and Carrasco crossed the open ground under Lance fire with the suit redlining and came back with the girl folded inside the arc of her arms, hull side to the enemy, 3 pulse scars cooling on her backplate. It did not balance anything. It was not for balance. That night, the order came down. Her company commander read it aloud on the platoon net, voice careful, and Carrasco heard underneath it something she couldn't name yet. All remaining forces would hold the Tocaneo line for 24 more hours. Not as long as possible. The phrasing was exact and strange. 24 hours from 0600. After that, retreat north in echelon. Priority of movement to surviving exosuit units. And a final line that made no military sense at all. That would make no sense until the world learned the word Fenix. Your 24 hours are of decisive strategic value. This is a direct assurance from Supreme Command. Hold, and what you hold for will be worth it. Worth it, said Reyes. The other Reyes, no relation to anyone, a lance corporal from Valparaiso with a burned face, and 8 confirmed kills. Worth what? There's nothing behind us but desert and then more desert. Carrasco looked north, where the Andes stood black against the stars, and beyond them nothing she knew of. Every army on Earth was losing the same way. The feeds from Katanga and the Pilbara looked like the feeds from here. If somebody upstairs thought one more day of dying in the salt had strategic value, then either the war had a piece on the board she had never been shown, or the people upstairs had gone mad in the general direction of hope. Doesn't matter what it's worth to them, she said. Here's what it's worth to us. Everyone still alive north of this line gets one more day of walking. Hidalgo, take the wall. Reyes, the culvert. Sleep in shifts. Day 7. They held. That was the whole day. They held. It cost the line half of what it had left, and it was the worst day of the 7, and it worked. By 0400 of day 8, what remained of Southern Cone Command was moving north in the long retreat that would not stop, everyone knew, until there was nowhere left to retreat to. Carrasco's suit carried the sleeping girl from the plaza in a cargo cradle meant for ammunition. 6 other suits walked with her. Behind them, the harvester's sound filled the whole southern horizon, patient, world-eating, unbothered. They had lost. Everyone had lost. Everywhere. And every soldier walking north knew it. What none of them knew was that at 0219 that morning, 3 hours before the retreat began, at the exact end of the 24 hours they had been ordered to buy, a message had gone out from a hole under the Antarctic ice to a crater on the far side of the moon. It was 4 words long. Phoenixes go. Fly. Chapter 5. The Bird Under the Ice. The project had never been about winning. That was the first thing they told you, in the deep galleries under Tsiolkovsky crater on the lunar far side, when you were read in, and only 2,900 people on and off Earth had ever been read in, out of 9 billion. Project Phoenix was not a weapon. It was not a plan for victory. It was the thing a civilization builds when its serious people sit down with the serious numbers and conclude that someday, in some form, an asteroid, a plague, a light in the sky that doesn't answer, the numbers might simply run out. It had been born in 2041 as a line item so black it didn't have a name, funded through 15 years and 4 governments by people who would never see it fly and never be thanked, hidden in cost overruns on lunar helium mining and Antarctic climate stations. Its architects called it, in their internal documents, with the gallows precision of engineers, the bailout ticket. Its formal charter was 1 sentence long. To ensure that an extinction-level event on Earth is not an extinction-level event for humanity. It consisted, on the day the light appeared beyond the heliopause, of 5 ships. They were built in a slagged-over construction bore under the crater floor, where no orbital eye could see, and they looked like nothing else humanity had ever made, because they had been designed backward from a single requirement. Do not be found. Long, smooth-hulled, running cold. Their skins were the one true technological miracle Earth had produced in secret, adaptive metamaterial cloaking, a decade ahead of anything public, drinking radar, bending light, holding the hull's surface temperature to the exact value of the background sky. It had never been tested against an enemy, because until 8 months ago there had been no enemy, only the theory of one. The engineers gave the cloak a 70% confidence rating against human-level sensors. Against the sensors of whatever had eaten Callisto, they gave no rating at all. When the review board demanded a number, the chief engineer had written on the whiteboard, "We will find out exactly once." Each ship carried the same cargo, quintuple redundant, so that any one of the 5 alone could do the whole job. 2,000 stasis pods, 10,000 sleepers across the fleet, and the manifest of those 10,000 was the cruelest document ever compiled by committee. Geneticists, physicians, engineers, farmers, teachers, midwives, machinists, botanists, for 100 children chosen by lottery from among the qualified families, and not one head of state. Not one general, not one billionaire, because the charter had been written by people who knew exactly how such lists went wrong and had built the selection algorithm to be unbribable and then destroyed the means of altering it. Below the pod decks, the seed vaults. Cryobank gene lines from 1.2 million human donors. Enough diversity to rebuild a species from a village, and beside them the frozen libraries of Earth itself, seeds and spores and embryos, wheat and rice and dogs and honeybees, and gut bacteria and coral. 11 million samples, the planet's entire portable memory. And below that, filling half of every hull, the terraforming train. Atmospheric processors folded like origami gods. Autofactories that ate regolith and birthed more autofactories. Orbital mirrors and rolls, like carpet. Gene forges for adapting crops to alien soil chemistry. Enough equipment, the planners calculated, to take a marginal world, right mass, right star, water present, chemistry not actively hostile, and make it, in 3 centuries of machine patience, into something a child could stand on with her face bare to the sky. 3 candidate systems were loaded in the navigation cores. The nearest was 11 light-years out. The ship's drives, fusion torch for the shout, then a beam-fed sail cradle for the long whisper between stars, would take 140 years to make the crossing. Every sleeper had volunteered for a one-way trip out of the history of the world. The plan had always assumed years of warning. What it got was 8 months, and then a battle at Mars, and then the enemy in Earth orbit, and the whole desperate mathematics of the endgame came down to a single problem that no one had dared write down until director Hannah Weiss said it aloud in the buried operations room under the Antarctic ice, 11 days before the Sala fell. The ships are ready. The sleepers are aboard. The problem is the door. She put the orbital plot on the wall. Earth, Luna, and the enemy fleet dispersed around both like wasps around fallen fruit. 130 surviving ships, sensor pickets everywhere, and above the lunar far side, always at least one harvester on a slow patrol arc. 5 ships under cloak, from a standing start, have to climb out of the moon's gravity well and light torches that burn at 40 million degrees. The cloak hides a coasting hull. Nothing hides a torch. If even one picket is watching farside space during the burn window, they see 5 drive flares rising from a crater they will then dig to the bottom of. And they are faster than us, and Fenix dies in the cradle, and mankind's ticket dies with it. So we need farside space empty, said her operations chief. For 11 hours. Tell me how you empty it. You give them something better to look at, Weiss said. You give them the biggest thing on the board, somewhere else, and it has to be real, because they watched us try deception at Mars, and they price our tricks now. It has to cost what real things cost. The room was quiet. On the side wall, another display ran the feeds from the Sala to Atacama, from Katanga, from the Pilbara. The ground war in its 6th day, the lines bending everywhere, 40,000 dead and climbing. They massed their orbital assets over active battles, said the operations chief slowly, reading the pattern data. Fire support, harvesting cover, retrieval. When the southern cone line breaks, the farside patrol rotates down to cover the Sala expansion. There's a gap. 9 to 13 hours, one time only, and it happens. He looked up. It happens when the battle is at its absolute peak. It happens if the line holds long enough to matter to them. If it breaks early, they never retask. If it breaks late, the window drifts past our launch alignment. Then the line holds exactly long enough, Weiss said, and heard what she was saying, and said it anyway. Give me supreme command. That was the arithmetic under the arithmetic. That was the sentence under the sentence in the order that came down to a staff sergeant in the ruins of San Pedro de Atacama. Your 24 hours are of decisive strategic value. No lie had ever been more true, and no truth had ever been less possible to tell. The fleet at Mars had bought the 18 days that got the last sleepers and seed vaults up the hidden lunar cargo tether. The soldiers in the salt bought the 11 empty hours of farside sky. None of them knew. 23,000 dead in space and 90,000 on the ground, spent by their own species as a distraction, and the 41 people on Earth who knew the whole shape of it would carry that weight to their graves, which would not, now, be long in coming. Weiss thought about Admiral Kovac often in those last days. They had met once, years before the light, at a conference neither of them had wanted to attend. She wondered what Kovac would have said if she'd been told what her fleet's death was really buying. Then she stopped wondering, because she suspected the answer was that Kovac had guessed. Believe me later when it matters. Some part of the woman had smelled a deeper game and had played her hand into it anyway, blind, on faith that somebody, somewhere, was spending her people rather than wasting them. Weiss hoped so. It was that or the alternative, and the alternative didn't bear thinking about. At 0219 Zulu on the 8th of April, 2056, with the Tokaneo line broken and the enemy's Farside patrol confirmed rotating sunward, Director Hannah Weiss authorized the only launch order in Project Fenix's history, for words long, and then she sat back in her chair a kilometer under the ice of a planet she would never leave, and the operations room, which had worked in silence for 15 years, stayed silent, because there was nothing left for any of them to do but listen. Chapter 6. 10,000. Dr. Vera Kovac was awake for the launch, because pod protocol put the last 200 sleepers under after the burn, in case hands were needed, and because she had asked, and because somewhere in the manifest algorithm's cold heart, it had perhaps weighed what her mother had paid and found a way to say so. She lay in the crash couch on C deck of the Svitanok. The 5 ships had been named in the last month, by vote of the sleepers, in 5 languages. Svitanok, Amon Acer, Alfer, Liming, Alba. 5 words for dawn. Nobody claimed credit for the idea, and everybody understood it. The couch held her the way her mother's arms had held her 30 years ago, which was a thought she permitted for one breath and then put away, because the drives were counting down and grief at 4 gravities is a physical hazard. The burn caught her like a wave taking a swimmer from behind. 4 gravities, then 5. The hull of the Svitanok singing one long structural note, and on the feed above her couch, she had rights to the EV feed. Most sleepers had chosen stars or nothing. The crater fell away, and the far side of the moon fell away, gray and pocked and secret keeping to the last, and 5 ships rose on pillars of fusion light into a sky that held, for 11 hours only, no eyes. They saw one enemy vessel at the window's ragged end. It was a picket returning early along the patrol arc, and the 5 ships were already ballistic by then, torches cold, cloaks drinking the sky, falling outward past lunar orbit in a silence so complete that the Svitanok's own crew spoke in whispers, as if the thing 40,000 kilometers away could hear speech through vacuum. The picket swept them with something. The sensors registered it as a pressure, a texture in the dark, like a hand passing over a blanket under which children hide. It lingered 90 seconds on the patch of sky where 5 ships full of the future lay coasting with their hearts stopped. Then it moved on, down toward the bright, busy ruin of Earth, where the real things were, where the harvest was. "We will find out exactly once," the chief engineer had written. Now they knew. Vera watched Earth for a long time on the aft feed. From 400,000 kilometers, it looked the way it had looked in every photograph since the first one. Blue, whirled with white, achingly bright against the black. You could not see the harvesters from here. You could not see the ribbon-lifted topsoil of the Atacama or the burning cities of the Copper Belt or the 9 billion people in the chute. Distance was a mercy with a terrible sense of humor. The feed carried sound if you wanted it. The last broadcasts, military traffic, civilian bands, the whole electromagnetic voice of the species, growing fainter as the fleet fell outward. She listened to a little of it. A resistance net in the Andes coordinating the northern retreat, a voice with a Chilean accent, a woman, exhausted and profane, calling suits she had no right to still have, moving into positions they had no chance to hold, and holding them. Vera didn't know the woman's name and never would. She saved 40 seconds of the transmission into her personal archive anyway, and marked it with the only label that fit. This is what we were. Before her pod, she keyed the message Q1 last time. Her mother's final transmission sat there where it had sat for a month, for minutes long, and at the end of it, off the record, on the channel. Vera, we chose it. Remember? I remember, she said, to the empty pod bay, to the 10,000 sleeping, to the 11 million frozen seeds, to the woman scattered as atoms through a wreckage field past Mars that no human eye would ever visit. We all chose. I'm carrying it. Go to sleep, Mama. The pod tasted of cold and antiseptic, and the gel rose around her like returning to some original water, and the last thing she saw through the frosting canopy was the aft feed's blue point, smaller now, a star among stars, and then it was a star, and then the lid's inner display shut it away and showed her only the number that would govern the rest of her life. Destination: Tau Ceti E, Candidate 1. Transit: 140 years. Status: all 5 vessels nominal. Cloak nominal. Humanity: 10,000 souls, 1.2 million genomes, 11 million sample lines. Sleep well. Behind them, Earth turned in the harvester's shadow and did not know it had a future and fought anyway. Ahead lay 140 years of dark, 3 candidate stars, a cloak tested exactly once, 10,000 hearts beating 4 times a minute, and a question no one aboard would live to stop asking: whether the things that ate the worlds followed the old blood outward, and whether, when the children of the Svidinok woke beneath a strange sun and lit their first fire on a world they would have to build with their hands, the sky above them would stay empty. The 5 dawns fell outward through the long dark, silent, together, carrying the seed of everything. The light of the sun grew small behind them,